Today we're unboxing an iPad Air 2 that should be running its original software version, iOS 8. I've been wanting one of these for a really long time, but they are very hard to find on iOS 8. So let's go ahead and get it opened up. And here it is. I actually don't think I have ever held one of these iPad Air 2s, so it's surprisingly light to me. We have the space gray color option here, and the back looks to be in really good condition. I'm just seeing one minor scratch here in the bottom. And taking a look at the screen here, it looks like there are some fingerprints, but I don't see any major scratches. I don't see any dents on these bottom corners, and these top corners look perfect as well. So I just wiped off the display, and it is in near mint condition. Let's see if this iPad has any battery power. And it does. And there we go, we launched directly into the iOS 8 setup screen. So just from the fact that this has slide to set up, we can tell that this is no newer than iOS 9. But what gives this away as iOS 8 is the font. You can especially tell on letters like A that this font is Helvetica New. Apple switched to their in-house design font called San Francisco with iOS 9. And once you've been collecting devices for a while, you can kind of just tell the difference between those two fonts at a glance. So let's go ahead and slide to setup now. This was Apple's first iPad to feature the Touch ID sensor, so let's go ahead and make sure that works. And it looks like it does. And there we go, we are met with the iOS 8 home screen and a prompt for iOS 15. Opening settings for the first time actually opens straight into the iOS 15 update again, but very thankfully it says that you have to connect your iPad to iTunes to do that upgrade. So it's really great that I don't have to worry about this iPad updating on its own. And in the About screen here, we can see that we have a 16GB model and it's actually on 8.1. And that's amazing because 8.1 was actually the first version of iOS 8 for this iPad. And the reason that this iPad did not get 8.0 or any earlier versions is because it was actually released in October 2014. So that was about 1 month into iOS 8's lifespan, and they had already pushed 8.1 by then. The default wallpapers included on iOS 8 are my favorite out of any legacy iOS device. There are 41 still images here to choose from. And you retain most of the really great wallpapers that had just launched 1 year prior in iOS 7. While gaining new ones for iOS 8 as well. Of course, this space wallpaper with the snowy mountain was the default. I believe this underwater image was actually used in iOS 8 betas. And these flower images were used in marketing for the iPhone 6. This iPad has only one battery cycle count and over 100% battery health. So let's talk about what the iPad Air 2 was. As I said, this iPad was released in October 2014, just about 1 month after the iPhone 6. And it was the successor to the original iPad Air released 1 year prior. So the iPad Air 2 was 10% thinner than the original iPad Air. And it was lighter too. The original iPad Air was 1 pound, while the Air 2 was 0.96 pounds. One of the biggest improvements for the iPad Air 2 was the display. And although the resolution, pixel density, and brightness were exactly the same, the panel was now laminated to the glass and included an anti-reflective coating. And that coating was really effective. So you can see here on the iPad Air 1, it's pretty much a mirror, while it was a lot more subdued on the iPad Air 2. And here you can see the non-laminated display on the original iPad Air. There is an air gap between this cover glass and the actual display. And comparing that here with the iPad Air 2, your content is right on the glass. It's pretty crazy to think about, but that anti-reflective coating as well as the laminated display are still not standard features on the iPad, even here in 2025. So you will not find those features on the base model 10th generation iPad. The iPad Air 2 had a new look for the speaker design, so you had a single row of holes while the iPad Air had 2. So Apple was kind of bringing that design in line with the iPhone 6. The volume buttons had a similar design to the iPhone 6 as well. And the mute or rotation lock switch that was present on the first iPad Air was removed. And as I mentioned earlier, this was the first iPad to feature that Touch ID sensor on the home button. The iPad Air 2 was powered by a 1.5 GHz A8X chip. And that chip was very unique because it actually includes 3 cores. And 3-core processors are very uncommon. This was definitely the only iOS device to ever use one. And that chip was paired with 2 gigabytes of RAM. And at the time, that was incredible because all previous iOS devices had been limited to 1 gigabyte. The strong specs of this iPad led it to get 7 years of software support. So it received major iOS versions all the way through iPad OS 15 in 2021. And I'd say that's another reason that these are pretty hard to find on iOS 8. Just because of that huge spread of versions that these could be running. This was also the first iPad to be offered in a gold color option. This iPad featured an 8 megapixel rear camera up from 5 on the first iPad Air. And it also included new features like time-lapse and slow-mo recording. This iPad launched at that typical iPad price of $499. Apple kept around the first generation iPad Air when this was released, but dropped the price to $399. This was offered in 16, 64, and 128 gigabyte storage configurations. And this iPad was sold new by Apple all the way through early 2017. Although that 16 gigabyte base model was dropped in late 2016 and upgraded to 32 gigabytes. And when this iPad Air 2 was discontinued in early 2017, we actually would not see the iPad Air nameplate return all the way until 2019. This iPad was of course originally the flagship iPad model, but then took a step back when the iPad Pro was released in 2015 and 16. iOS 8 was a relatively small update over the huge redesign that came with iOS 7 1 year prior. It introduced the continuity and handoff feature that allowed you to continue tasks that you were doing across your Apple ecosystem. It also introduced customizable widgets in your notification center. It introduced QuickType with the suggested words on the top of your keyboard. And of course, we've got to take a look at these classic emojis here in iOS 8. iOS 8 included the Tips app, which would basically instruct you how to use the UI. iOS 8 also brought the recently deleted folder to the Photos app. iOS 8 slightly redesigned the control center, and on the iPad Air 2, you gained a mute switch since the physical switch was deleted. iOS 8 brought a timer to the camera app, and on the iPad Air 2, you could actually take burst photos. This multitasking view was a bit unique because it would feature your recent contacts on the top. One complaint about iOS 8 though is that it did not include any sort of like split screen multitasking. That would come later with iOS 9. Since this is an earlier version of iOS 8, we have the red music icon here. This would be changed to a white icon when the Apple Music streaming service launched in iOS 8.4. I did sync some music from my iTunes library to this device so I could appreciate this old school music app. And another cool thing about iOS 8 is that this is the oldest version of iOS where the App Store still works. So I was able to sign in with my Apple ID and download all of these apps. The only catch is that you have to have previously downloaded all of these apps before and access them through your Purchase tab. For whatever reason, that's just the procedure Apple has you go through to download prior versions of apps. I've really enjoyed playing Grand Theft Auto on this iPad. It's a pretty nice experience. Temple Run is another really nostalgic game that I like to play on this iPad. Sadly, this is just a 16 gigabyte model, so I don't have a ton of room for content, but it's still fun regardless. I'm making really good progress on my collection of iPads running their original versions. So I have the original iPad on iPhone OS 3, the iPad 2 on iOS 4, the third generation iPad on iOS 5, the fourth generation iPad on iOS 6, the iPad Air on iOS 7, and now the iPad Air 2 on iOS 8. I really enjoy collecting through iOS 9, so I just need a first generation 12.9 or 9.7 inch iPad Pro on iOS 9. So that pretty much concludes my look at this iPad Air 2 running iOS 8.1. This iPad has a really unique blend of older nostalgic software with modern and premium design. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next one.